Dave, as President Donald Trump's signature tax bill heads to the U.S. Senate, some Republicans say those proposed cuts don't go far enough to tackle the nation's growing deficit.
And this includes Senator Ron Johnson, who was the target of protesters today, upset over a proposed $716 billion reduction in Medicaid funding, which would be the largest in the program's history. Chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman has both sides tonight. He's live in Oshkosh where that protest took place. Jason.
Chris, that protest took place right outside Senator Ron Johnson's office here in Oshkosh. Many who showed up told me they wanted their voices heard, fearing any cuts to the Medicaid program would have a direct impact on their family. Hoping to get the attention of Senator Ron Johnson and his staff, a small group of protesters held up signs and stood next to medical equipment appearing old and worn.
We know that Ron Johnson has been ignoring our requests for meetings. We know that Ron Johnson has been ignoring our letters and our phone calls. So we are here to be visible. We are here to make sure that he cannot ignore what we are talking about.
Democrats say the cuts to Medicaid would help fund tax cuts to the rich and cost millions of people their health insurance.
Medicaid is a lifeline for so many people. It would be devastating.
Katie Sherrill is a 34-year-old son who's been dependent on Medicaid nearly his entire life.
With 60% of funding from the Congress or the national level down to the state, that's significant. If Wisconsin loses that, it'll affect him, it'll affect all his providers. I mean, it's also people's work.
Republicans say the bill would place work requirements on some of those receiving Medicaid and force additional paperwork to ensure those applying for it are indeed eligible. Senator Ron Johnson, though, vowing that the Senate will make changes to what the House previously passed.
And I'm sorry, the House bill would probably add, I've calculated $4 trillion. You're saying you have these independent analysts saying it's 3.3 to 4 trillion. I agree with that. We have to reduce the deficit, and so we need to focus on spending.
This legislation is likely to pit conservative and moderate members of the GOP against each other as they work out a compromise in the Senate. The president is calling for this bill to be on his desk by the end of June. Reporting live in Oshkosh, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.